So if you look at the exam outline and you look at what we've offered you in these first modules, you'll see it's a little different. And that's because I wanted to give you some information to carry with you when you're dealing with individual topics. I wanted to give you some overview information, what are the key critical components that we're going to use to address all the threats using these controls and making sure these controls are configured correctly for the particular responsibility within the organization. So the first piece on this is the underlying security models. Now, if you're a CISSP or you've heard of models before, this usually gives you a shiver down your spine because we start talking about Bell LaPadula and Biba and Clark and Wilson and Brewer Nash and all that stuff. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the simple NIST models that come from Special Publication 833. We're going to look at each one of these models and say, how does this fit our particular situation? So if you ran screaming from the room, just wait until we get through with this. These first 4 discussions that we're going to have, these are key to your overall understanding of the topic, okay? So we're going to talk about security objectives of the system and the data, and then we're going to get into these models, and the models are going to center around supporting availability, integrity, confidentiality, accountability, and assurance. There's also a lot of interdependencies with these models, and you're going to see some diagrams here that will show you how they all fit together. You're going to see the diagrams a couple of times. When you get to the diagrams, this is a really good time to whip out the NIST Special Publication 833 and go, hey, let me look at this diagram a little bit more. And don't hesitate to ask us questions. Okay, so the security goal. What's the overall goal in all of security? Let's take a look at the slide. Enable an organization to meet all of its mission or business objectives by implementing systems with due care consideration of IT-related risk to the organization, its partners, and customers. Achieve what you're supposed to do the correct way so that nobody gets in trouble. That's my way of looking at it. Okay, so now we need to take one step down and talk about the security objectives of particular systems and data. So, the security goals can be met through the following security objectives. If you didn't learn anything else from me, know what these terms mean and how they are supported. You center around these 5 terms. So it's 4 terms in here, and then assurance is kind of the meta term that we talk about. We're going to look at each one of these. So generically, there's something called the security services model. This is the complete model with everything jammed into it. And what you're going to see is we're going to decompose this and break it apart into little pieces. So down at the bottom, you've got system protection, security administration, cryptographic keys, and identification. And those foundationals, they support the things that we need to do. Okay, so how can we prevent problems with identification? Well, we'll use non-repudiation, transaction privacy, authentication, authorization, and access control. If those things fail, we're going to use things like audit, proof of wholeness, intrusion detection, and containment systems to support that, to recover from a failure of those. And it takes all this stuff together to make a complete system. But what we want to do is we want to break it down into smaller pieces. Let's start with availability. Definition. Requirement intended to assure that the systems work promptly and service is not denied to authorized users. It's there, it's ready, it's up, it's available. Oh, I can't use available in the definition. Now, I will tell you that in commercial entities, it's all about availability because they will say, listen, if the control's getting in the way and somebody can't buy, turn the control off so we can sell because we've got to make money or we're not going to be here tomorrow. And that's not the way of it with other organizations, with government or military organizations. They do things a little bit differently. So in availability, the object is to protect against unauthorized deletion of data or any causes of denial of service. Let's take a look at the model when it's stripped down here. Now, when we look at the primary availability services, we say, okay, we want authorization, access control, access to the resources. If the access control enforcement fails, we want intrusion detection and containment to come in and protect us, to recover from it. We want to look at the resource to make sure that it is correct and whole. We're going to look at each one of these details in a minute. The primary availability says, hey, authorize people to be there. You need an access control system to get that authorization in place. In future modules, we're going to talk about the fact that how do you pick an access control tool that has support for intrusion detection and containment. Integrity. Now, integrity's got two facets here, so that's why I put up the word facets. Data integrity has not been incorrectly altered while in storage, during processing, or while in transit. Now, you can't say for integrity that it's never been altered. It has to be correctly altered, and it shouldn't be incorrectly altered. For instance, if you go in and you fat finger your bank account information and you say, I want $3,000 instead of $30, well, you didn't mean to. It wasn't evil. But what happens if somebody else comes along and they incorrectly alter that information? Well, they may be adversarial. So the intent when it comes to integrity is the accuracy, is the purity of the data. It has nothing to do with the fact that it was an evil person or a good person that did it. We want the data to be accurate. That's what integrity is all about. Now, separate from this, so we've got the data that needs to be accurate and complete, but then the system that it sits on top of, that system has to have integrity, and that means that the system is performing its intended function. It's doing what it's supposed to do in the way that it's supposed to do it. So we're going to look at the little pieces of this. Okay. So underneath of this, for integrity services, we have to have cryptographic key management that is for actually protecting it. Identification has to be in place. And then we're going to talk about protected communications. Without the confidentiality mechanisms, the integrity mechanisms won't work. Okay, so what's it take to make the integrity mechanisms work? Well, this looks the same as availability. That's pretty close. That's the truth of it. I mean, they overlap. Remember, that's why we jammed all this model together. Confidentiality. Now, this is the biggie. Requirements that information be disclosed only to authorized individuals. Who's authorized? Who's allowed? What happens if it's other people? Then we've lost confidentiality. So it's disclosed to the correct people. Confidentiality protection applies to data in storage, in processing, and while in transit. So we call this data at rest or data in motion. Now, what happens is that confidentiality in a commercial entity takes a second seat to availability and integrity. It may be in your organization because you're in a super secret organization. The confidentiality is the highest requirement. So you can say, we'll operate, but if we can't operate confidentially, we're not going to operate at all. And that's what happens in the U.S. military. Some systems and for specific types of data, confidentiality is extremely important. When we talk later on about personally identifiable information, that's a big thing for corporations. They have to protect that in a multitude of ways. That's bigger and bigger with the compliance requirements that are coming out. So let's look at the diagram here. Look what we did. We washed away all of those other things. We need authorization. We need control of enforcement. We don't really have any of the other components here. And now we're going to put it all together. Accountability. Now, I want to know it's you that did this thing. So accountability says the actions of an entity may be traced uniquely to that entity. If you log into the system and share your password with somebody else, do we still have accountability? You can go, well, Dean, our policy says that I'm responsible for all actions taken on the system with this account. You know, if you gave away your password, you're still responsible for it if you gave it away to somebody else. Now, let's dig down into this. Accountability is often an organizational policy requirement and directly supports some other concepts of non-repudiation, deterrence, fault isolation, intrusion detection and prevention, and after-action recovery and legal action. If you're confused about these terms, don't worry. We're going to come back to each one of these terms. You're going to see these a lot over the 50 or so sections that we have. The big thing for accountability services is the recovery mechanism, is the audit mechanism. We have to know that it's you, but we also have to know that we can tie that to you. We have logging and reporting. And so later on, we'll reach into log management. And log management becomes a big deal because you can get all this data, but you can't sift through it and find what you need. So primary accountability services focuses in on audit and unique access control environment.